FPS games have always had certain guns that tend to get on people's nerves more than others. Maybe it's because they're extremely popular, easy to use, or don't really require much skill to do well with. Or maybe it's because of how strong they are and how quickly they can put you down before you have any time to react or fight back. The Battlefield series is definitely one of those FPS games that's had its fair share of controversially annoying weapons appear over the many years it's been around, some of which arguably being a bit overpowered or overused, putting them in a negative light, and giving them a notorious image, compared to the other guns that you can choose to equip. Whether that makes them a noob weapon, or just simply makes them a frustrating thing to be killed by, is something a lot of people have argued about over the game's life cycle. But there's no denying that there are quite a lot of guns that a lot of people tend to hate on more than the rest, for several different reasons, because of what they can do, or because of how people have chosen to exploit their power, over the many years they've been around. So without further ado, here's my top 10 most hated weapons in the Battlefield games. Kicking off the list at number 10 is a really powerful semi-automatic sniper rifle that got added into Battlefield Hardline's robbery DLC, the M82-416. Although this gun might not really seem like something a lot of people hated on, it still pretty much made the bolt action rifles irrelevant to a lot of snipers when it first came into the scene, down to it being such an easy weapon to use. The M82 can typically kill players in just 2 shots over a fairly long range, and because it's a semi-auto rifle, this means that you don't have to cycle the bolt in between shots, giving it a faster than average fire rate while allowing you to stay scoped in to acquire your targets quicker. It's arguably one of, if not the easiest sniper rifle to use out of the lot, not just because of that high power and fire rate combo, but because it also happens to have one of the fastest bullet speeds in the game too, pretty much beating everything else outright, while having barely any bullet drop to worry about either. Those bullets are going to be travelling at 800 meters per second, which is roughly about 300 meters per second quicker than average. A very big difference, making it effective in the hands of noobs, and super effective in the hands of good players. But most of all, it pretty much rendered the other sniper rifles useless in hardcore servers, with the M82's power being easily exploited, making it far superior in almost every way, usually letting you delete your enemies in just 1 shot. So anyone that hates getting taken down by snipers will surely hate being taken down by this monster of a weapon. In our 9th place spot, we've got the AEK-971, an assault rifle that's popped up in quite a lot of the Battlefield games set in modern times. As the Battlefield series has progressed, so has the AEK's fire rate, which has gotten quicker and quicker every time it came back. The gun started out with a pretty basic fire rate of 600 RPM in Bad Company 1, going to 800 RPM in Bad Company 2, and eventually reaching 900 RPM in Battlefields 3 and 4. And as you know, with rapid firing assault rifles, they do tend to get quite popular, because in a lot of people's minds, being able to shoot and take players down faster is always the best way to go. The gun was basically everywhere, not only having the power to shred people up in the blink of an eye, but also being somewhat more manageable to control than its faster firing counterpart, the FAMAS, which also had a smaller mag size, making it less appealing to the average player. Combine the AEK's power with the fact that you can constantly supply yourself with health on the go with the Assault's med crate, and you've got yourself a recipe to cause some serious damage. A pretty bloody effective close to mid-range loadout that wouldn't go unnoticed by a hell of a lot of other players. Let's just say that the AEK was pretty much constantly popping up on the kill feed, kind of an annoying thing to be taken down by too, especially on some of the game's notoriously hectic maps like Operation Locker and Metro. You can argue whether or not this gun was overpowered, but there's no denying that it was favoured by a lot of the people that used it, and irked a lot of the people that didn't. Going back to Battlefield Hardline now, with one of the fastest firing guns in the whole franchise, the K10. Back when Hardline first launched, the K10 was a little pain in the arse for quite a while. Just like with any rapid firing SMG, it was dominant in close quarters, very dominant, to the point where whole lobbies were filled with people using them, especially on the maps with shorter sightlines like Row House and The Block. A lot of the time, if you walked into an indoor area, you could expect to be greeted by a bunch of camping enemies wielding K10s, often guarding cash crates on the Blood Money game mode, and hanging around objective points within buildings. The fact that the gun fired at 1200 RPM, and could potentially kill in about 3 bullets, generally meant that there was no way in hell that you were going to get through that area alive, unless your enemy had to reload, or unless you happen to be holding a shotgun, which even then, still isn't a guaranteed win. The gun surely had its limitations, but still it became a problem for anyone who wanted to rush forwards and play the objective, with players constantly being met with a wall of bullets every time they walked through a bloody door. It did eventually get a damage nerf, but only by a tiny bit, still making the K10 a punishing weapon to be up against in a close range firefight. Getting killed by a bullet hose is always going to be a bit annoying in close quarters, but this one in particular just took things to another level, especially with it having such a generously low amount of hipfire spread, making it a hell of a lot of people's go-to SMG. Coming in at 7th place is the Parabellum MG1417 from Battlefield 1, a light machine gun that came along in the Russian DLC, that definitely made a fair few people rage quit. Just like with a lot of the other LMGs in the franchise, the Parabellum has a whole pile of ammo to expend, generally having similar characteristics to some of the others we'd seen before. The difference with this thing popping up in Battlefield 1 though, was the fact that it had quite a lot of very aggressive factors that made it somewhat more appealing than most of the other LMGs on offer, or at least the ones that were in the game till that point anyway. The Parabellum not only had more bullets in its belt, allowing it to sustain fire for far longer durations than a lot of the others, like the Benay-Massi, Madsen and BAR, but it could also do so at a very fast rate of 700 RPM, which might sound a bit rubbish compared to the LMGs in other games, but in Battlefield 1, that was actually pretty quick. Of course, the Parabellum's arrival into Battlefield 1 was instantly met with angry players wishing it hadn't been. A lot of people argued that the gun was OP, and a lot of people weren't particularly very happy about getting mowed down by this beast every time they walked along the narrow corridors of Fort de Vaux. Let's just say that the quantity and speed of bullets flying out of the gun's barrel was a little bit too much for some people to tolerate, especially when it became a lot of support players' new favourite toy. The gun did have a pretty atrocious recoil pattern, so it's debatable whether or not it's balanced compared to its counterparts, but nevertheless, it still became one of the game's most annoying weapons to be killed by, so it deserves a place on this list. The next weapon in the video is definitely one of the more controversial ideas to be added into a Battlefield game post-launch, the stupidly powerful Boys AT rifle from Battlefield 5. Now this thing was wild. Obviously, a weapon designed to take on vehicles was going to be a bit dangerous, but putting this gun in the game was always going to seem like a tricky thing to balance, and therefore a bit of a gamble. There's a few catches to using it. You have to mount the gun onto a surface if you want to use it effectively, and it does have a painfully slow fire rate and bullet speed. But apart from those factors, the Boys AT rifle practically acts like a Martini Henry on roids, wiping out players up to and even beyond 100 meters in just one shot to the body, literally giving them no time to react or counter the attack. It kinda functions a little bit like the tank of a pickup weapon from Battlefield 1, only this thing can be equipped on a normal recon loadout and used by pretty much anyone on the server whenever they want, which it certainly was for quite a while when it first became available. The fact that it has to be used on a surface can often help the gun rather than hinder it, as this means that the user can just simply camp amongst bushes and blend into the game's environments, while picking off players in the distance one by one. I suppose you could say that the Panzerbuch also deserves a spot on here, with it playing out in a very similar way, but because the Boys AT was the first anti-material rifle to come along, and it's been pissing people off for a longer amount of time, that gives it a slight edge. But there's no denying that they're both ridiculously annoying weapons to be killed by. Halfway down the list now, in 5th place, is the good old Model 10A, one of the most notorious overused shotguns in Battlefield history. The Model 10A, but more particularly the Hunter variant, is and always has been the most popular shotgun in Battlefield 1 by a country mile. If you're going to be taken down by a shotgun in that game, then most of the time it's going to be this one that does it, accounting for roughly about 60% of all shotgun kills, and that's just the Hunter variant. This gun was dominant for quite a few good reasons. It's got loads of power per shot, decent choke spread, and a slower but still reasonable fire rate, due to its pump action nature. A pretty nice combination of attributes for any shotgun to have, making it very ideal for its intended purpose. The problem is, these attributes can often seem a little bit too ideal, because despite those numerous balancing nerfs and changes the gun's encountered over the game's life cycle, it still always seemed like a bit of a pushover compared to the other buckshot firing shotties. The Model 10A Hunter is pretty much a corner camper's wet dream, being able to take people down in just 1 or 2 blasts very easily in close quarters. And because Battlefield 1 often features a lot of built up areas, narrow trenches and small building interiors, these shotguns can often seem very enticing. So why not use the one that a lot of people deem to be a little bit OP. But that's the thing that makes this gun so bloody frustrating to be taken down by, because of its high popularity and because of its high lethality. If you can go a whole session without being killed by this thing, then you've done pretty damn well. Coming in at 4th place is a rapid firing submachine gun that got added in Battlefield 5 specific DLC, an experimental Japanese weapon called the Type 2A, another pretty infamous new addition that tends to get on people's nerves on a regular basis. In Battlefield 5, the Nambu Type 2A is basically a little bullet-spewing bastard. It's practically a portable meat grinder, having one of the craziest fire rates in the game. And just like quite a lot of the other guns in the list, you're not going to be getting very much respect from your victims as they fall once again by the game's fastest shooting SMG. I guess you could say that it's a kinda similar gun to Battlefield Hardline's K10, a close range weapon used to upset anyone who happens to get themselves in a close range situation with it. But there's a bit of a difference with this thing, because unlike the K10 and other bullet spamming machine guns, the Type 2A happens to have a very generous ammo capacity to complement that fire rate. 1028 RPM plus 50 rounds is a pretty eye-watering combination. Plus if you want to sacrifice a few of those shots for an even faster fire rate still, then that's totally possible. The Type 2A is somewhat balanced out a bit due to its heavy recoil pattern and damage output, which has taken a bit of a hit over time through weapon balancing updates and patches. But it's still nevertheless a truly horrible gun to be up against in CQC, making it a weapon that's despised by and favoured by a lot of Battlefield 5 players, including its army of noobs. When we take a look back at the Battlefield franchise's history, there's one notorious weapon that springs to mind a lot when talking about things that are overpowered and hated: the USAS-12 shotgun, but more specifically that diabolical idea to make it compatible with those highly explosive frag rounds. Now in case you don't remember this far back, or weren't playing Battlefield games years ago, the USAS-12 first turned into a proper menace of a weapon during Battlefield 3. Not because it was a buckshot firing boomstick, designed to excel within closer proximities, but because you could choose to equip 12 gauge frag rounds with it, and literally waste people from much further distances, essentially turning the thing into a semi-automatic cannon. You didn't need to be very accurate, because of its spread and splash damage, so all you really had to do was point in the general direction of your enemy and click the trigger until they fell over. Pretty simple, but hilariously overpowered. Of course, the USAS-12 did eventually see some massive nerfs, making it a somewhat more tolerable weapon. But the memory of it being a complete balancing joke still resonates today amongst the long-time community members. As a bit of a throwback to this meme of a gun, DICE decided to put the USAS-12 with frag rounds into Battlefield 4, making it a special pick-up-only weapon, as you can see in the background footage. And being a battle pickup, it still retains a lot of that original power, which is still designed to make your enemies hate you with a passion. There's no denying that the USAS-12 with frag rounds was a ridiculously OP thing to let everyone use back in the past, and I'm pretty sure there's some old school Battlefield veterans out there that still have nightmares of it today. In second place on the list is Hitler's buzzsaw itself, the dreaded MG42 from Battlefield 5, one of the most infamous weapons of the war and in the game. It was inevitable that this gun was going to make its way into Battlefield 5, but upon doing so, it definitely lived up to its reputation of being an absolute monster. The MG42 is pretty much the fastest killing machine gun in the game, having a combination of strong bullets and a fire rate that can reach up to 1200 RPM, which is a hell of a lot quicker than nearly everything else. A weapon with so much power would obviously be quite an attractive thing to use in a Battlefield game, which it certainly was, generally being the most popular gun of its class. The MG42's characteristics, though, aren't entirely to blame for it being such a hated weapon, because although it can be a pretty damn brutal thing to use, one of the main reasons why it became such an annoying thing to be killed by is mainly down to it practically being the poster child for the newly added, highly controversial MMG category, a new class of weapon for the Battlefield series, purely designed to piss people off. The MMG concept in Battlefield 5 was frustrating as hell, because it gave corner campers, hill humpers and windowsill nesters a nice little tool to wreak havoc with. Combine this with the game's pretty poor visibility, along with loads of dark shadowy areas and bushes that can be sat in to conceal your position, and you've got yourself something that's easily exploitable, that's going to be despised by lots and lots of people. And with the MG42 being the headliner, it also saw the most use and got the most hate. So in our number 1 spot on the list is the extremely obscure, extremely popular and extremely annoying Hellriegel 1915, arguably Battlefield 1's most notorious weapon. Some things in life are certain: death, taxes, and the fact that if you play Battlefield 1 you will be taken down by the Hellriegel many times during a match. The Hellriegel, also widely referred to as the Noob Regal, has been winding people up ever since the game launched, because it's always been a ridiculously easy thing to use, having some of the most generous stats in the game. Considering it's an SMG that holds loads of ammo, it's also got some fairly snappy kill times over a decent range, and it's also relatively easy to control, given a very strong set of traits. The gun was a hell of a lot more overpowered back when we first got our hands on it upon Battlefield 1's release, though it continued to remain almost everybody's favourite go-to gun for a very long time after, as even though it got nerfed several times over the game's life, it still always seemed to have the best balance of attributes compared to the other submachine guns. Things have changed a bit nowadays, ever since the SMG 0818 got its fire rate massively bumped up, as that gun now dominates a lot of servers and competes with the Hellriegel's popularity. So you might be thinking that the 0818 deserved to be here instead, because a lot of people now find that to be the more menacing weapon of the two. But when it all boils down to it, the Hellriegel was a pain in the backside from day one, and continues to be a pain in the backside even today. It's been annoying people for a much longer amount of time, and still generally harnesses the most hate when you think back about weapons with bad reputations, so it rightfully deserves its spot here. So which weapons grind your gears the most in the Battlefield games? Can you think of any other guns that are really annoying to be killed by? Let me know all of your choices and why you find them so frustrating down below in that comment section. Don't forget to subscribe and apply all notifications if you want to be the first to see new content coming up in the future, and feel free to check out my channel to see anything you might have missed along the way. Thanks for watching guys, have a great day, I'll be seeing you in that next episode.